All right, so the next installment we got going on here from Charles City is Ronald. Um, his name's Ronald, but everybody that I heard out there talk about him called him Ronnie, so we're gonna call him Ronnie. Um, and that name's more fitting to him than Ronald. He seems like a Ronnie. Um, he is, as of this year, 99 years young, and he's still a little ball of fire. He still collects antique cars. He's got a star and a moon. I think they were actually both made in Iowa, but they look kind of like Ford Model Ts, but one's a star and one's a moon. He's still got a shop. He still tinkers. 99 years old, still lives on his own. Is having memory problems. 99 years old, fairly obvious. So that's to be expected. But he started there at Charles City in 1954 after he got out of the Army. And he was there until they closed the doors. He held basically the same position the entire time. He was a maintenance man in the Foundry. And he kind of had the reputation of being the guy that could just look at something and figure it out. He didn't really have any formal education to speak of. He was just natural. He was one of those guys that was just naturally super, super mechanically gifted. I wish I could have seen him back when he was my age, because I bet he was a complete and utter ball of fire. But we've seen him once before. He showed up to our get-together we had there in Osage last year. And he is the one that built the replica of Heart Par number 1 that is currently sitting in the Floyd County Museum, which we've looked at a couple times. So this is the face to go with that tractor. He's the one that built it, and he's built a bunch of other half-scale tractors to go with it. He built a half-scale Heart Par Little Devil, half-scale Heart Par 2040, John Deere D, oil pole. He's built and they all run and they're all fully functional. Like that little Heart Par number 1 that's at the Floyd County Museum, that runs and functions. That's not just a toy. So, like I say, this guy, I wish I could have got to him before his memory started to leave him, because with the stuff that he could come up with, even with his memory starting to fade, if that's even half what he had back when he was all the way there. So without further ado, here's Ronnie.
When I come up and applied for a job, I told him I would like to be a machine shop mechanic, but I knew nothing about it. And other than that, I was at an early age got to be an automobile mechanic, and I was a truck mechanic my 3 years in the service. And my father was a carpenter, and I worked with him after school or school vacations and stuff. And he had one of his old friends working with him. And the day I went up and applied for a job, my dad put a couple years in the Ruhr Valley in Germany working in the shipyards. And he said, never again. Dirty, dusty, and noisy. And the guy that worked with him said, yeah. He said, I worked in Oliver, or Heart Par, he said, in the 30s. And they put me in the Foundry. And he says, whatever you do, don't let them stick you in the Foundry. He said, you couldn't see a foot in front of you. So dirty and dusty, noisy. And I had never worked third shift other than while I was in the military, you know, if it was my turn to stand guard in the middle of the night for a couple hours. And so I come up here, and old Ed Croft interviewed me, and took me down to the foundry, told me that's where I was going to be in maintenance, introduced me to John Speaker, and they took me around, showed me, and then when I had to go back up to the personnel office, and the Speaker told me, around the corner there is the shower room. That's where you'll go, find yourself a locker, put your clean clothes in it, and then you could get through this door to go down to the M&R when you come in at 10 o'clock tonight. So I went home thinking, oh, goody, I got an inside job finally. And Pa wanted to know where I was going to work. I said, in the foundry on third shift. That went over about like a cement duck. He said, you'll be sorry.
How old were you?
Huh?
How old were you?
About 21. And it went from there. I worked there a year. I started in November of '54, and I worked on days all of '55 because I think the guy's name was Paulus from Rockford passed away, and that left an opening on days. And nobody else seemed to want it. So I went on days, and then I got laid off in January of '56 and called back in February or March of '57 because my second choice on the getting hired was a production welder. So I got called back on production welding and worked there almost a year. And then the foundry opened up again. And I went right on third shift then. And that's where I stayed for 14 years. The only reason I stayed there is I liked my job. The year that I worked production welding, I made up my mind I'll never try to beat the clock again as long as I got to work. And then off and on through those years, I was on third. Well, you know that too, Cliff, that there was up and down periods where the shops and the assembly line would be laid off, but the foundry would work. Well, I got to know a lot of guys in the foundry there, and some of them in the plant. And all of a sudden, why, the whole place was shut down except the foundry. And it was always my job. I would cash my check on Friday night, have the grocery list with me. I'd go to Hy-Vee and buy our groceries because Levon was working in New Hampton then. And I'd run on to some of these ladies in the fairway store. Are you still working? Yeah. Well, by God, I'm going to have to see if something can't be done about that. My husband had some blank many years in there, and he's laid off, and you're still working. Well, me still working went along with being called a Foundry rat. Yeah. And, that's where I stayed because I liked my job. And I could get by with a lot of things that you couldn't on production welding. As long as all of the cleaning room was running, Waddell and Felt were happy. I could kind of disappear here and there for a while and do this or do that, whatever. And that was part of why I liked it too. I wish now, though, that if I had it to do over again, when there got to be openings in the tool room, that I would have went there. Because I've got a small mill and 2 lathes and stuff out in the shop that I play with. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I can make something out of it. I won't do it for anybody else because it's all trial and error. And that's where I was working here when they shut the door. And I only had one thing that ever happened to me that I still think about at night. Yeah, you knew Charlie Waddell in the cleaning room. See, when I finally got on days and stuck out in the cleaning room, then I had this period there of 3-shift time. At noon, I would have to go in the shot blast machines and check it all inside. And by noon, I went do my thing in there, pull the switch, put my tag on it, opened the door and went in. I never took a light with me, just my flashlight. Look around mostly for wear holes in the manganol plate for 3rd shift to patch up. And this one afternoon, I went in there, done that, turned around, come out, shut the door, locked it, and went over and took my tag off. Ready to push the button to try to make the machine, make sure everything run. And something in my head was telling me, don't. Go back and open the door. And I stood there for a while. Ready to push the button again, and don't do that. I never felt that way before, that I did then. I went and I opened the door, and there stood Charlie Waddell. He snuck in behind me when I didn't know it, and I went out and left him standing there and shut the door and locked it. And I never did talk to him to ask him what went through his head when I locked that door. Because if I'd have pushed the button, he'd have been gone.
It would have vaporized him. That's steel shot.
Yeah.
That's where they run the casting, and it throws the steel shot, I guess, to clean it, right? So yeah.
See, and that was that new 6-wheeled wheelabrator.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of tons per minute went through there for shop.
Yeah. It just.
He wouldn't have lasted 10 seconds. And I opened the door, and there he stood, just as white as a sheet. And the first thing I did, I looked at him. Adele, you son of a bitch! If I'd have killed you, you'd be dead, and I'd probably be a drunk. He got out of there, boy, and he made a beeline for his office, and I don't know if he ever told Zanatti or anybody about it. I never did. But I spent a lot of time thinking, what would have I done if I would have pulverized him?
He was checking on you, I suppose.
But yeah, afterwards, one conversation we did have, when we talked about it a little bit, but he said, I just wondered what you looked for in there all the time. And I told him, look for where? So, because if in the forenoon, if there would have wore a hole in that manganol plate somewhere, before quitting time, he'd be wore a hole through the outside steel.
It'd be deadly for the people outside.
And, oh yeah. Every once in a while, if you was in the wrong place when the doors opened and closed to let things in and out, be a stray BB floating around. It was just like getting peppered good with a BB gun, up close. But that was the only mishap I ever had. I did get in trouble with the Foundry office a couple times. Because a different tool salesman come in and wanted to sell grinders, and I thought they was a much better tool than we was using, and I was kind of instrumental to have him come back, and Zanatti got me a couple times on that. That is not your place to be, to hire or have somebody come in and sell us new tools. That's what I'm here for. But I made a lot of friends with the workers. And I made a grinder out of two different ones that for a long extension grinder to grind holes back in the gear case. And that did not go over well in the office. If we'd have wanted something like that, we'd have went out and bought it. We didn't hire you to be a tool designer. And I thought, okay, so much for being a hero, making something. Well, there was always a program if you could improve something on the tractor. It was a hero. You know, evidently designing the different tools, not in that category.
You got paid. If you made a suggestion that was accepted to make an improvement on tractors, anybody, and they'd figure out how much it improved it or saved them money or something like that. You got a percentage, and it could be substantial. It's a one-time payment. But your grinder didn't ever pay you anything.
Well, yeah. See, it would never make any difference on money on grinding the gear case.
But it made the life a lot easier for the guy doing it.
It made it a lot easier for the man that was doing it. And I kind of had to sneak around and get that job done because I needed to saw up 2 different grinders and weld them together, and I got Willie Ring to do that, no problem. But then I'd have to have a little machine work done on the shaft. And I did have most of that done by one of the pattern makers. I tried the tool room once, and oh boy.
Who was the pattern maker?
Oh, Bob Rhea was one.
We just stopped at his house. He wasn't home.
And
I gotta get him rounded up sometime.
Jim, when Jim Frericks worked there,
Yep.
yeah, he done a different
Can't stop at his place anymore.
little.
You have to visit him at Riverside.
But I made a lot of points for the guys who had to use them, though. And I think every once in a while when they gathered all that stuff up when they had the sale, that I'd have went through them grinders and took one of them out and took it home.
Yeah.
Just to have it, but
Well, after you got your hands slapped, a year or 2 later, I don't think they bothered you anymore when you kept doing it, did they?
yeah. It was fun while it lasted. It made us a good living.
Yep.
We built the house, we raised Kevin.
And you built a steam engine while you was at it, or an old tractor.
Yeah, I made most of the parts that I had to make to fit on that international combine differential to make my D John Deere. And then little Willie Ring helped me a lot, welding different things for me on that 2040 that I made. And what was his name? I can't think of it. The floor molder. It was from Clarksville. He's dead too now.
Matt Clark's father-in-law.
He made some castings for me that are inside of the front wheel on that 2040.
I'll think of it.
He made a lot of toy pieces for me too. Bob Rhea too.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, why, like I say, it was good too. It was the 30 years that I put in there. And as far as working, I really never regretted staying in the foundry. Because, I don't know, I just got interested in watching cast iron being made. And, well, that's what brought on the cast iron I had that you bought. I was addicted to it, I guess.
What was the problem with the restroom that was close to one of the air compressors? Once in a while, the toilets would blow up.
Oh!
You tell him about them.
There was I think it was a drain pipe of some kind off from the air compressor that got put into the sanitary sewer system. And the one that I always heard about that got blasted a couple times was that was when the Foundry office was still in the old pattern shop, which was just a little bit from the foundry. When we would check the last thing in the mornings on third shift, they would check and make sure that the water buildup in the compressor and stuff was drained and everything was working. And if you happened to be sitting on the stool at that point in time, you got a good washing. And that old gal that was Foundry supervisor's gal, secretary, I guess, got it a couple times.
Oh. Ooh.
Well, to a certain few individuals, it was funny. But to her, you know, go home and change clothes. But eventually something got changed, and it didn't happen anymore, but by that time the foundry office was moved into the new part, and it didn't matter anyway.
Were you involved any when they built the new addition on the foundry that never got used?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, it gave us a lot of cheap repair parts, and in a way there was a bunch of it I would have liked to see get going. It would have been a big help. But most everything in there that was in the way got set outside, out back, and eventually found its way to the junk man or the cupola. A lot of high-priced machinery went. And but yeah, I would have really liked to seen that get done. It would have been a big help in some places. And but then some of it was a good place on third shift to take a nap too, in the new basements that was there. There was some twists and turns in them and stuff like that, but a lot of people didn't know about it. And there was a lot of tunnels underneath the old part of that foundry.
Full of old DC electric lines and DC electric lines and steam pipes and so forth. Well, what's the story on the pigeons and the cranes?
The what?
Pigeons and the cranes. Now the pigeons had ammunition. They made ammunition.
Yeah. All right. Dwayne King had to talk that. He was in on shooting some of them.
Well,
But that charging floor was full of pigeons.
and they made ammunition with them. Pigeons made ammunitions. They laid eggs and they forgot them sometimes, and those eggs would become highly charged.
Yeah. And
You drop an egg just ready to explode on somebody, and it would when it landed.
yeah. Well, it was the same way when we had to, on third shift, had to check tram rail. The beams up there laid all full of powder.
Yep.
And somebody go by.
Swipe your hand on it.
But
That was a method of management and labor reaching a workable agreement on getting along.
yeah,
If you got assigned to tram rail maintenance too much by the management, You put up with it. You did your job because it was dangerous not to. You had to do the job. You didn't want a ladle of hot iron malfunctioning, but it was onerous duty. But eventually, the management will come to check up on you. It might take 3 or 4 weeks. But when he went home with his pores covered in sea coal and things like that because you'd swiped it, somebody else would eventually get assigned.
Well, I was in, well, they had me on a special shift after they put in the number 1 hydroslinger. They were having trouble with the belts. And one of the representatives that come in told them that with the especially the ram belt on the hydroslinger head, to loosen the belt while it was still hot from the sand, because leaving it in there so long stretched like that, it stretched the belt and you couldn't tighten it anymore. And so I was low man on the totem pole in days. So I got picked to come in at 7:30 and go home at 4 o'clock instead of the 7
to 3:30.
Like the Foundry. Well, that went along for a while, and all of a sudden my Charlie Miller woke up to the fact that there was a little bit of overtime involved in that sometimes. And he was senior man and he wanted it. Goody, let him have it. But I happened to be there the night the electric furnace blew up on Virgil Bryant. And it not only shook the dust off of the rails, it blew fire brick up as far as number 1 slinger, because I was up there on number 1 slinger working when it went, and I didn't know what the hell happened, because all of a sudden a big boom and everything turned dark, the dust. And so I knew it come from down east. So I got out in the main walkway and started headed down toward the cupola. And John Wright was on the charging floor with the state scale man, setting the scales stairs. And where they come down, want to know what the hell happened. You know, we stood there and looked around a little bit, and John Wright said, Virgil Bryant was supposed to be down here by the cupola, because he always sprayed water in on Friday nights on the cupola drop and into the electric furnace to help cool it down, so they wouldn't have to run the fan all night. Well, I didn't think that fan cost him that much money anyway, but I stood there one night watching him. That water that he sprayed in was it was a hose about that big around that he was spraying the whole stream in there. When he would first start, that water never hit the bottom. It was steam and vapor. And I think they said the night that it blew up that some water got underneath the iron it was left in the bottom of the electric furnace and caused a hydrogen blast or something like that. And
A tiny amount of water in a mold when you pour iron in would cause a massive explosion.
yeah,
A tiny amount of water. That was a big joke to pull on somebody pouring iron, to pour a little bit of water in a mold. And it was dangerous, but people did it occasionally, and it was like Raleigh said, it vaporized the water. It was like a little hydrogen.
well, you're dumping cold water on molten iron, 2,600 degrees hot. It's not a good mixture.
No.
But he liked the fact that I'm number one. But he didn't know as much as he thought he did. And he was not the greatest to work with. And one time they put me on third shift time. I worked through the noon hour, changing the 30-inch grindstones out there. And I got along good with them guys that run the grinder. They would help, even though they wasn't supposed to. Because if it didn't get started right away when the whistle blew, I'd put them on downtime, and that cut into and some of them grinding jobs paid pretty good. But he took it away from me. And that went along for a couple of days, and all at once he had to change a stone. And so I got out there right away when, being a good boy, the whistle blew. I went out of the M&R and back to my hole in the wall. Well, there'd stand, I can't lift this stone. I can't put that on there all alone. So I seemed to be able to. And so I would help him. And after a while, that got to be pretty old. I'd go out when the whistle blew at 12:30, but I would not go to the cleaning room. I'd go someplace where I could hide or talk to somebody else. That he needed help putting that stone on there. And Bart's would blow my whistle, blow my whistle, blow my whistle. And pretty soon I'd go wandering into the M&R office, and Dennis wouldn't know where I was at, what I was doing. So I didn't have to do it anymore. And I said, I ain't going out and changing that stone. A couple of days later, I had my third shift time back. That took care of that.
Would act like I didn't know anything, and I would act like I was very appreciative of his help. It went pretty good.
Yep, that's what I did. I learned.
And he eventually retired, and somehow I managed to go ahead and get along.
Well,
all right. But I was just a young kid.
I learned that.
And I was hot-headed, but I did learn that's how you got along with Pat.
I did learn that even before I come to work up here. I always played mechanic at home when I was going to school. Worked on my own car and my friend's car. And I knew most of the old boys that worked in the Chevrolet garage. there in Allison. And when I had a problem, I'd go in and talk to them. And I learned right quick like, act like you're dumb as a post, and you will learn a whole lot. And I did. And I really appreciated anybody who could tell me anything when I had a problem.
I enjoyed working with you.
And
Remember Andy? Remember he would go out to the buzzer out in the parts room, and he would blow that on the button there. He would stand there a couple of minutes and decide you weren't going to answer it, so that he would start walking to the office. You'd be calling in at the office and he wasn't there.
Yeah.
He was blowing it from the parts room. You could never find Andy. He was a foreman, and there was a button to blow the buzzer out in the parts room in the foundry. I don't know why he would blow it there, because you'd call the office, his office, and he wasn't there. And he would only wait just a little while, and then he'd start slowly walking to the office where he wasn't when he was blowing the button.
Yeah, there was a few pros and cons, but all in all, I enjoyed
I did too.
my time I spent in there working.
My brother-in-law, Dennis Pettifish, enjoyed the foundry better than I did. I would always head for the manufacturing when my seniority would put me there.
Yeah.
Do you remember Walt Brock?
Yeah.
He came out of the military. It took him a while to settle down and get along. I think he tried to run the foundry maintenance crew like he was in the military.
Yeah.
He had a little bit of a rough time, I think, for a while.
Yeah, I always thought once in a while when we get to change in management, where do they find these people? They don't know nothing and think they know it all. But, what's his name? He lived by Plainfield now. He worked for I don't know who owned it at the time either, but that tune-up shop across from the post office. D&L Car Care or whatever it is. And he walked with a limp.
Randy Castor.
Randy, yeah. He was one of the better ones that ever come in there.
Yep.
That when he gave you a work order, he said, I hope you know what you're doing, because I sure don't know nothing about this.
He's a pretty sharp guy, too.
Oh, yeah. And it was always kind of fun when Ray Vandevetter got that job. Because if you ask Ray about, he wasn't bashful to take the wrench right out of your hand and do it. Now, did you see what I done?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Roger Wagner.
Huh?
You remember Roger Wagner?
Yeah.
When he stood up beside you, you were just about looking at his belt buckle.
Yeah.
He had about the longest legs I ever saw.
But do you remember when old Hank Bethold from Nashua worked in the...
Hadn't thought of him for a while.
He was one that always wanted to do his share of the work. But he was... What did they call that people? Stick them in a tight place and they go bonkers.
Claustrophobic.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then we'd have to work down in between where the two large core room ovens come together.
Yep.
And Hank would get sent out there to help.
He'd get close and he'd start to get nervous.
Oh man, he'd go wild.
Yep.
But there was something he couldn't help.
Yep.
And
Leroy Stonecipher,
yeah,
one of the nicer men on the planet, electrician, and he was colorblind in the Foundry. And it was hard enough to see the color on wires when you weren't colorblind. And you would work with Leroy, and he would always work and finally say, "Could you tell me the color of this wire?" Working in the Foundry, you and I couldn't tell the color of the wire. We had good eyesight for colors. Everything's black in the Foundry. And he worked in the Foundry because he hated Al Colbert. Al Colbert worked, he took it, I mean, he made some maintenance people hate him. And Leonard Bornstein and Leroy Stonecipher hated Al Colbert so bad they wouldn't work in the front end. And Leroy needed to work in the front end where he could see color.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and I got along right well with Carol Johnson.
oh yeah.
And
Yeah, careful.
when I wanted to try and make a phase converter to go to 220 to 3-phase. Oh, Carol was, I think, next to me, one of the world's greatest cobblers. And Bornstein didn't like that.
No, but Bornstein couldn't make a phase converter and Carol could.
And I would go to where our spare motors set, and just coming in that doorway down, and chuck one of them into my hole in the wall, and I'd look for this and I'd look for that. And Carol went upstairs because there was a bunch of big empty boxes up there that was all wired up for some of that new stuff that was going in the east end that never materialized.
Yep.
And he run me a length of big round 3-wire cable down into my hole in the wall there. So we'd have 220 in there to play with. We'd get all that stuff wired up, hooked together, and have it setting on an electric motor to switch on it. And Carol would get it all tied together. Don't switch, electric motor would run. So we drew pictures for me and told me what size capacitors I had to have and that sort of thing. And every once in a while, Bornstein would stick his head in there and see what we was doing. He was gone. Didn't want nothing to do with that. Well, I got a Carol Johnson phase converter sitting right out there in the shed on that 3-foot radial arm drill.
Yep.
And when they put the REA put the new box on the pole, I was pretty proud of some of my cobbled up stuff out there in the shop that worked. And I had to show them my phase converter. And oh man, they just backed right away from that. They just
shut the door and they left.
Do you realize what them capacitors are? I said, yeah. And tell them, I know what I'm doing. They ain't gonna bother nobody back there. Well, where did you learn some of this stuff? Carol Johnson. Oh, we know Carol Johnson.
Little Cedar, Iowa.
Yeah. And, but no, I got a nice Keller hoist out there that I got from a guy that he got from somebody that bought a bunch of hoists from the sale. And it ended up being a 3-phase. Well, I got it in there hanging up if you want to raise something up with it. We start this switch, and then we go turn the drill.
Then the hoist works.
Got it hooked onto my phase converter.
You told him about the bathroom problem with the air compressor, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, did you tell him anything about the dust collector and the transporter systems?
No, that was a dirty job you didn't want to get hung into doing. Yeah. Of course, after we got the new ones up there that had the new style bag on than what was in there at first, it made a difference, but it was still something you didn't want to do. Dust. If you find yourself sometime where you need a little recharge at a Foundry dust, come see me. I got a fruit jar full.
Oh.
I brought a fruit jar full home.
Huh.
It's not convenient to where you're sitting, I suppose.
Huh?
It's not close to where you're sitting.
No. It's out the shed.
Yeah. My brother-in-law was talking about bentonite and sea coal and the sand, and sometime I suppose you might put together an exhibit of that, maybe, and take it to the museum, possibly. Most human beings really have no understanding of foundry sand, but
Or how foundries work in general.
yeah, but the bentonite is a binder that plugs up pores in soil and won't let water pass.
Well, what I would like to see is the foundry sand that they used when they made them door stops that I had.
That stuff must be very fine.
It must have been, because, boy, them things were just like this tabletop, and they wasn't shot blasted or anything either. You know, iron toys was the same. And Willie Ring was just about in the same boat I was. If he could have some pictures or spend some time looking at something, he could go to the shop and make it.
You talked about Earl Ring. Both of the Ring boys are no longer with us.
No.
Earl and Willie Ring were each different, with different personalities, but they must have been cousins of yours. Each of the three of you had different capabilities, but there wasn't anything that the three of you couldn't do.
Yeah. Well, see, we had...
And wouldn't try.
When they put when we got them new wheelabrators, the small ones, well, like the one that Bill Winkleman run for quite a while, it was across from where I was in the hole in the wall there in the foundry. The bottom door that slid up and down in there, the first round, they was not good, but that's what was on the machine we got new. And then they made some changes, but it was expensive. And the foundry office wouldn't buy it. And John Deere had one. And me and Willie used to work on Dennis Bart's. Why don't you send me and Willie on a tour to the new John Deere Foundry? No, I can't. Why? Because I can't let you look at the bottom door in that new shot blast machine.
Okay.
Because we'd come home and build one. And that, somewhere as far as Zanatti was concerned, that was a big no-no for us to build one. So we put up with it, and so did they. Because any time a little casting fell come around when they were dumping them and went down in there, the little roller chain that run that door up and down broke. And that was not fun.
Did you ever solve the problem? Never did.
No, because there was no solving to it. We thought about putting rubber baffles and stuff. So, but then that wouldn't work either.
But Deere had solved it, and Wheelabrator had solved it, but you couldn't.
Yeah, Wheelabrator had a
Solution.
I don't know how many $1,000 it would have been to buy the new style door. But the Foundry office wouldn't go for it or knew much about him until he come down there as foreman.
Well, apparently one of his greater skills was finding a good, secure place to recharge or take a nap.
Take a nap, yep.
That was apparently his renowned skills when he was an electrician. So they couldn't really get a lot of good out of him as an electrician, so they hired him for management.
And I got along good with...
I worked for him as an electrician.
With Dennis as our foreman. And me and Jay Mayman went around a few times.
Yeah, I did too with Jay.
And,
I got along with Dennis all right.
He had me up to be fired a couple times. Jay did.
Well, Jay did that with me. Dennis stuck up for me.
When it went to Dennis Bart's, it stopped right there. And I told Dennis, I said one time, Jay is probably a good farmer. What the heck is he doing in here? Why don't you leave him on the farm? Because there was just no way to change his mind when and there was a couple times he got burnt pretty good, but he didn't get fired. We done things his way, and they wasn't running yet at 7 o'clock in the morning. But anybody else they'd have fired, but him they kept.
You're running out of time.
Oh, we're still good.
I've always assumed that Jay was protected. You know, he started as an apprentice millwright.
Mm-hmm.
And he made it through the program very quickly. Was a full, well, I don't know if he ever made it, but he got into management very quickly. So I always wondered who
was
protecting him.
The first summer that I worked there, you knew Gordon Maxwell in the Foundry?
I knew of him.
He was a good guy. And they had, him and his wife each had a car because she had a job. He lived just north of Green a little bit. And then to the east, a mile or two. And something happened to her car, and it would be a while before it was fixed. And he wanted to know in the morning when I come to work if I could stop by. He'd be waiting at that corner where a gravel road intersected 14 just above Green. He'd like to ride with me. Yeah, no problem. And he was always on the ball, and I made sure I had plenty of time. And we'd just talk about this, that, and the other thing, and he was quite a golfer. And I like to watch golf on TV, but I've never played it. And one time it got around to the fact that they needed an extra supervisor. They was going to start a second shift on the little squeezers in the foundry. And they needed a foreman. Would I be interested? And boy, he really laid it on to me, you know, about all the good things about being a fireman. And then finally one time it got around to, well, you went through high school, didn't you? I said, no. I quit school in the 10th grade and went in the service. And that ended the management talk. Because I didn't have a high school diploma. But I wouldn't have took it anyway.
You talked about the early in the conversation. You talked about when you were talking about the foundry, and you were talking about the belts were given trouble, and you had a special shift. The machine you talked about was the hydroformer.
Slinger. Yeah.
Hydro slinger there, yeah. Do you know what that is?
I've been here all week. I've been hearing Foundry guys talk about slingers and squeezers and all, and I have absolutely no clue.
All right. A slinger was a machine, and Raleigh can explain it, but you didn't want to get in the way of that. It maybe wasn't quite as dangerous as maybe the shot blast machines, but you wouldn't have lived through that experience. It was
that sand come out of there hard enough to pack.
You kind of know what a silage blower is, where you feed in the silage. Well, these things slung sand, and they slung a lot of tons of sand like a silage blower does, but they were slinging sand, and they rammed the sand in the mold with all the force that was needed to have that sand packed like a cement road. Tell them about it, Raleigh.
Okay, now whereabouts you want to go with that?
Well, how they worked is they had a belt. You tell them about those machines.
Well, the gravity fed out of the sand bins down to the belt. But that belt carried it around, and then on the front end of the slinger, there was a big flywheel type weight, with a cup on it. And
bunch of cups.
That cup would go around and get the sand and throw it into the mold, or the cup, yeah.
This thing had a handle on it, the guy was running.
Yeah, well, seeing what the old ones were hand operated. The hydro slinger had a joystick on it. But I never did hear. But that sand must have come out of that slinger head at a terrific rate of speed. Because it would, if you like when we would have to check them and have them running ready to go in the morning, you'd have to run it a little bit. And if you run that on the platform up there where you were standing, you had a little too far swung around, you know, and you had to get a shovel to get it pried loose. You'd hit that. So it went down there with
on the platform and stuck.
A lot of pounds of force. And I know you didn't want to stick your hand under it when it was going.
There was a belt that fed this, and when he talked about a flywheel, this was on the other side of the shaft of this spinning wheel that was throwing it like a silage blower vane.
See, the motor set on the end, and then the shaft run through with that. Yeah.
So that it throw it up like a tube, and then you work the tube down?
No, this belt was feeding onto this wheel. There was a belt that, like he talked about, the sand bins up above was dropping the sand down to a feeder belt that brought it over to this spinning wheel. So it wasn't throwing this. All this was doing was throwing the sand straight down, and this joystick was running it over the mold here.
The guy would be,
And he was trying to be back where it was safer. The old ones. Judy's grandfather, Orth Bledsoe, worked on the crew that built number 3, that built it. You know, this was years ago. They used to have to stand there with a handle and run these things. And kind of like these shot blast machines, if you'd got your body in the way of this, you'd have lost that part of your body or your life. I mean, if you'd have been under this thing. But this thing threw large quantities of sand with such force that it was rammed or packed. But this was a wheel that was throwing this quantities
so
of
hit
can.
the wheel and the wheel just shot it straight down.
Right. Yeah, the belt fed it. Yeah.
Different times when I checked them, I was always thought, I wonder if I got a pair of Willie's leather welding gloves. If I could hold my hand under there and let that, because I was very curious as to how damn fast and how many pounds per foot or whatever you'd call it, that sand come out of there.
It's probably good that you didn't try it. There's terms like jolts. And jolts packed the sand by, there was a lever a guy would let the sand fall into the mold, and these machines made a massive amount of racket. And they took the whole...
Well, it bumped the whole thing up and down to pack the sand.
Yeah, and so here's this machine with this whole flask of mold, and it's going bang, bang, bang. Right beside the machine on the right side and left sides are doing the same thing. These are called the jolts, and that's how the sand was packed. It was just slamming this hole.
But I watched, well, I had different times would get sent out there when there was nobody else handy to do something if they had a problem. But I was always fascinated with them. Yeah, I would think, boy, that must have been a drunken party the night they invented that thing. Because, I mean, it was amazing how bouncing like that packed that sand.
So did they use different, did they, like, was the slinger for one size of mold, and then the jolts they would use like a different...
Yeah, different processes for different, the slingers was used for big castings.
So frame tubs and gear cases and stuff like that.
Yeah. They had squeezers. And that's where you had machines that squeezed this stuff. Now you had castings where they had to put all sorts of, by hand, and they had to assemble some of these molds with different sand castings you had to put in there. Well, you couldn't put them in a jolt that was going to go like this. There's different processes that you had to do this. And he talked about the core ovens. Well, you had cores where you had to delicately make this stuff, and they would have to go be baked so that they could stand up under some of the processes of assembling this. But
I don't know the old boy's name. Never did know it. But there was only one that I knew of that worked at a time. His job was head core assembly.
Mm-hmm.
He would assemble all that core business
intricate
that
stuff
went inside the cylinder head.
Like a cylinder head, yeah.
To make the water passages and stuff. And I think that old boy had a racket all his own.
A lot of that stuff was, these cores had been specially made through the core ovens and baked with resins and things like that. And some of this stuff then would dissolve when the iron was poured. These were the passages, and some of this stuff then was designed to disappear when the iron was poured through. In the sand, the main sand would stay, and these things would be passages that would disappear as the molten iron came through. But we're getting off of this. This is supposed to be about your experiences.
Yeah.
And when you needed to have a little time alone, where would you go?
Well, a lot of mine was when I was making parts with my tractors, was in that electrical room above where I was at, because most of those boxes up there were not in use and nobody bothered up there. And when I'd be cleaning up, sandblasted some of my toy parts and stuff and painted them. Late in the afternoon, I'd hang them up there to dry.
Well, I bought the most expensive tractor that the plant ever built. You want to tell a little bit about that tractor? The most expensive tractor that was ever built at the plant. I bought from you. You remember that?
Oh, that case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to tell Ethan about that?
There's an outfit, or was an outfit, by the name of Vendex that made iron toys. And they made a C-case tractor.
Weefel.
Dean Weefel.
Dean Weefel. This story ties into Dean Weefel.
It was sold by Vendex, and but it was on the market yet today. They are very expensive, the case and that combine. And I wanted one cast iron. So I bought a brand new Erdl case toy tractor. Took it all apart and had Dean Weefel use mine for a pattern to make cast iron pieces.
Well, Bob Rhea made the pattern pieces.
And
Dean Weefel poured them.
And yeah, but Rhea got in on it, making parts and stuff like that. And well, that was part of the side benefits. That's what you worked at the Foundry for.
Right.
And oh yeah, one of them times when about the grinders that Zanatti got on me about, I found out too where a lot of things went under the table from that. The old boys out of Davenport that was making them grinders, you know, and come Christmas, he come in there and asked, I wanted to know this, that, and the other thing. We talked a little bit, and he said, by chance, he said, could you go out, would you get in trouble if you went out to the parking lot? I says, no, not too much. And he says, I got something for you. I got 2/5 of Canadian whiskey, and how many people are in your family? I said, 3. And I got 3 steaks about that thick. And he had a whole back end of his car filled with that. So you know he was going around making points somewhere, and I was in on that. And I thought, yeah, I better be careful. I'm getting in more here than I know. But that did irk me when I could make a job easier for somebody and then they wouldn't go for it.
Yeah. Well, he made this tractor out of cast iron that he wanted. And he told me when he sold it to me that it was probably the most expensive tractor that the plant ever made that they didn't know about.
Well, it seemed funny because one half of it Weevil made just once. Come out perfect. And the other side, I should have kept them halves just to have them. But it was always, it was probably too narrow of a space and too thin for the iron to run through. It would never come through and get to the other side. But yeah, Dean logged a lot of hours making that. But when I showed it to him when I had it all done, I think he was pretty proud too of what he did.
Well, the rest of the story is that a couple years ago or so, Raleigh sold that tractor to my wife and I. Dean Weefels passed away, but his daughter is married to Matt Clark. And I and Judy gave that tractor to Matt Clark to give back to Dean Weefels' daughter.
Yeah.
Now, Raleigh cashed a pretty big check. A really nice check for that tractor. That didn't cost his Dean Weefels' daughter anything.
Well,
we're friends. We are.
When you first bounced that on me, it took a while to soak in what all you was going to do. And then after I got everything figured out, and now even yet today, I'm glad she got it.
Well, that's where it belonged.
Because it's always nice when something like that gets kicked around and comes home where it belongs.
Matt figured it was going to cost a lot of money to get the tractor, and I promised that he would get it, and I promised you he would get it, and I didn't take a penny for it. That was no cost.
Yeah, and I thought, when I had it home here sitting in the basement, I would look at it. I thought the finished product turned out pretty darn good.
It was passed pretty good. And as far as we all know, it's the only cast one in the world.
Yeah.
Done right here in Charles City.
Yeah.
At the White Foundry. And the White Foundry has made cast iron for a few hundred customers in the world that couldn't get better cast iron done anywhere in the world. That's kind of actually neat. And someday you should meet Matt Clark and see his collection of cast iron that was done in the foundry here in Charles City. And there is one piece done by Raleigh and Dean Weefel and so we've got to get you in front of Jerry Bill sometime and I don't know what your time's going to be, but there's a few people yet you've got to get in front of, and I'm glad we got you in front of Raleigh here today.